We're going to look at Federalist number 10. It's one of the most important Federalist Papers, and we're going to look at James Madison's first paper in this series. Up to now, Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, the other two authors, have written papers and articles. But now this is James Madison's first paper. James Madison is considered to be, or is known or referred to as, the father of the Constitution. He was really important in the process of what led to the writing of the Constitution, in the Constitutional Convention, and also afterwards in helping pass the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution in the first Congress of the United States. Okay, when I say the first Congress of the United States, after this Constitution goes into effect, when you say first Congress, means the first 2-year Congress. It is different from the first Continental Congress and the second Continental Congress. That was before this Constitution was written. So the first Congress of the United States met from 1789 to 1791. 2 years. That's the first Congress. So here, James Madison brings up a very important word, faction. And he actually defines it, explains it himself. But before we start reading this one, just remember, in Federalist number 9, Alexander Hamilton brought up something very important. He talked about those very important things about what establishes a good government. Checks and balances, separation of powers, judicial independence. Those are some of the things that he introduced for the first time. He said, in this new government, we're setting it up in a way that you will have representatives chosen by you to represent you, to write your laws. We have separation of powers. In other words, you've got the executive branch, the president and everybody that's under him, separated from judiciary, that's judges and the courts, and the legislative branch. The legislative branch is the Congress of the United States, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. Every state sends 2 senators to the Senate. So he says, we've devised this Constitution to ensure that your freedom is not going to be jeopardized. And to do that is you have separation of powers. And then you will have checks and balances. For example, you make sure that the president just doesn't choose who he wants to nominate to be a federal judge. You balance it, or you check it with the way the Constitution does. The Senate has to confirm the president's choice. And if the House of Representatives writes a law, writes a bill, the Senate has to okay it. So you check and balance. You have to bring a balance to the system. So those are the important things that was mentioned in Federalist number 9. In Federalist number 10, Madison brings up this important issue of a big republic. Because up to now, the great political philosopher Montesquieu, the French political philosopher, had described the idea of checks and balances, separation of powers, in his book Spirit of Laws, which he had published in 1748, I believe. But he had said republics work only in small areas. Here Madison says, no, we're going to extend the republic. A large republic will work. And then he talks about faction. He says, when you have free government, when your citizens are free, whatever you do, you are going to have factions. And what does he mean by faction? Faction, he describes it. He says, by a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion. Remember, when you use the word passion, ambition, all these words have negative meaning, very negative meanings back then in 1780s. Or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens, which is opposite to the rights of other citizens, or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. In other words, this is a group. It could be a majority, it could be a minority, but their interests is going to be against the interest of the aggregate, the whole population, all of the people, or for the good of the community in the long run. So he introduces this word, faction. Okay, now I will read a few lines from Federalist number 10. Among the numerous advantages promised by a well-constructed union, none deserves to be more accurately developed than its tendency to break and control the violence of faction. He brings it up here. The friend of popular governments never finds himself so much alarmed for their character and fate as when he contemplates their propensity to this dangerous vice. Remember, every time they use the word vice, means something that's bad for the community, not good for the community. Vice is the opposite of virtue. The friend of popular governments never finds himself so much alarmed for their character and fate as when he contemplates their propensity to this dangerous vice. I'm sorry, I repeated it. He will not fail, therefore, to set a due value on any plan which, without violating the principles to which he is attached, provides a proper cure for it. See, he looks at faction like a disease. He uses the word cure. The instability, injustice, confusion introduced into the public councils have, in truth, been the mortal diseases under which popular governments have everywhere perished, died, as they continue to be the favorite and fruitful topics from which the adversaries to liberty derive their most specious declamations. The valuable improvements made by the American Constitution on the popular models, this Constitution is much improved compared to the old constitutions. Both ancient and modern cannot certainly be too much admired, but it would be an unwarrantable partiality to contend that they have as effectually obviated the danger on this side as was wished and expected. Complaints are everywhere heard from our most considerate and virtuous citizens, equally the friends of public and private faith and of public and personal liberty, that our governments are too unstable, that the public good is disregarded in the conflict of rival parties, and that measures are too often decided not according to the rules of justice and the rights of minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority. So remember, he's getting you ready to understand that just because we have a majority here, it doesn't mean that they can violate the basic rights of minority, regardless of how small the minority is. So he's going to be talking about other aspects of free government, what a freely established government is, what kind of government we can establish that will guarantee our safety as well as our freedoms, and not allow a majority faction, a majority group, to violate your rights because you're the minority. So in part 2, I will come back and I will just read it to you. So don't forget, please. Make sure you have the text in front of you as I read it, listen to them, and also make sure you watch the videos I recommend, you read the books or try to read the books I recommend, and those will help you a lot. And if you're not, if you don't speak English as a first language, like I'm doing this for you all, just don't be disappointed, because the more you practice, the better you will get. I promise you. Once we listen to the whole thing, to all the 85 papers, and I will explain certain things to you, and if you read or watch some of the videos that I mentioned, it will make more sense, and then you can improve on that, learn more. Thank you.